November 1992, in the streets of Guadalajara, Mexico, Arellano Félix's hitmen opened fire on El Chapo. But killing El Chapo turned out to be almost impossible, because with the help of his top 4 hitmen, El Chapo was untouchable. Now that he's in prison, what happened to these ruthless killers? Let's find out. El Cholo. This is Orso Ivan Gastelum, alias El Cholo. He joined the organization in 2008. Started as a low gunman, but quickly rose through the ranks and became the cartel's security chief. He was the brutal right-hand man of the infamous El Chapo, a position that would ultimately lead to his own downfall. January 8, 2016. The last escape of El Chapo was like a scene from a Hollywood movie, a high-stakes game of cat and mouse that had the whole world on edge. But he had a moment of weakness, a desire to go to Los Mochis, despite El Cholo's warning that it was too risky. But the allure of the city and seeing his family were too much for the drug lord to resist, and soon the two men found themselves surrounded by the Mexican Navy. Their only escape was through a tunnel connected to the house they were hiding in. Then they hijacked several vehicles to evade capture. But it was all for naught. At a checkpoint, they were apprehended and taken to a hotel on the outskirts of Los Mochis. A photo of the arrest shows El Chapo looking pensive, his head reclining and his hand on his chin, while El Cholo looks defeated, with his gaze fixed on the ground. It was as if they knew their freedom was about to be taken away permanently, with no chance of pulling up another daring escape. El Chapo was extradited to the United States in 2017. El Cholo soon followed in his footsteps, after U.S. authorities revealed how deeply he was involved in the Sinaloa cartel's operations during El Chapo's trial in 2019. How, you ask? The FBI had a key player on their team, El Chapo's system engineer. Cristian Rodriguez had built an encrypted communications network for the Sinaloa cartel, allowing El Chapo to discuss business without the fear of being caught. But the engineer's loyalty wasn't to the drug lord. He was secretly feeding the FBI information for years. As the FBI played back intercepted phone calls during El Chapo's trial, the incriminating evidence was insurmountable. On one occasion, his voice dripped with control as he directed El Cholo on how to handle captured rivals, ordering him to check it out to ensure they didn't execute any innocents. On another, El Cholo bragged about kicking the behinds of police officers, but El Chapo urged restraint, cautioning him to take it easy with the police. But with a sarcastic snicker, El Cholo told his boss, "You taught us to be a wolf. Act like a wolf. I remember, and that's how I like to do it." After the evidence was revealed, the Mexican authorities had no choice but to hand El Cholo over to the U.S. government. And as it would turn out, El Cholo wasn't the only one affected by El Chapo's arrest. However, for some others, their fate was far more dire. El Bravo. This is Manuel Alejandro Aponte Gomez, alias El Bravo, an infantry lieutenant known for being a superb soldier. However, his days in the army were short-lived. In 2003, he was assigned to fight drug traffickers in rural towns in Sinaloa. However, his ambition went far beyond defending his nation. There, he met the man himself, El Chapo, who made him an offer he couldn't refuse. And El Bravo wasted no time deserting the army and joining the other side of the law. In 2006, during a skirmish near Moynora Hill, El Chapo was being hunted down by dozens of army troops. The firefight that ensued was said to have lasted for hours, with only those who knew the terrain well being able to move under the cover of nightfall. That night, El Chapo managed to escape, only thanks to the help of El Bravo's well-trained group of gunmen, who knew the mountain like the backs of their hands. After this incident, El Bravo rose to become the head of El Chapo's escort, and his name began to be mentioned in military circles. The military saw his betrayal as a personal affront and a backstabbing of their own, and they were determined to bring him to justice at any cost. As an officer and a graduate of the military college, El Bravo was well suited to organize and train the escorts for El Chapo's organization. He was known for his expertise in logistics, equipment, and intelligence gathering. He helped El Chapo to escape on many occasions by building several tunnels around northern Mexico. And when the noose finally tightened around El Chapo, El Bravo wanted to step in his boss's shoes. But little did he know that soon he was going to come face to face with a fate far worse than rotting in a U.S. prison. April 9th, 2014. The news of a chilling discovery leaked to the media. The bodies of 3 men were found, brutally murdered with clear signs of torture, in a block factory near La Cruz de Elota. The absence of shell casings on the scene suggested that the killings had taken place elsewhere, and the bodies had been disposed like garbage. But these weren't just any men. One of them was none other than El Bravo. Even with identification found on him, authorities had to confirm his identity through his fingerprints, as the body's condition made him almost unrecognizable. El Bravo's murder raised serious concerns about an increase in drug violence. The speculation was rife that different factions within the Sinaloa cartel were competing for power, and rival drug gangs were seizing the opportunity to exploit the organization's perceived vulnerability after El Chapo's capture. Some locals in Sinaloa claimed that El Bravo failed to protect El Chapo in February 2014 when he was captured. As a result, El Bravo lost his position and perhaps his life as well. Another theory involves a cartel member who allegedly worked as El Chapo's personal secretary. He claimed that El Bravo fought for rule over the Sinaloa cartel after El Chapo's arrest. And before El Bravo was murdered, the secretary warned of a possible confrontation between El Bravo and Damaso Lopez Nunes, aka El Licenciado. The latter was seen as a potential successor to El Chapo, but according to the secretary, El Chapo's sons had more affinity with El Bravo. Despite the speculations, nobody knows what really happened. But one thing remains for sure. The impact of El Chapo's capture was far-reaching and devastating. And the list of those impacted by it doesn't end here. El Jaguar. This is Jose Antonio Torres Marufo, alias El Jaguar. Currently, he's being held behind bars at a maximum security prison in El Paso after being extradited from Mexico. But what did he do to earn such a fate? According to reports, Torres Marufo is one of the founders of the Gente Nueva branch of the Sinaloa cartel, which was embroiled in a vicious war with the Juarez cartel. The bloody conflict, which took place between 2008 and 2012, left around 10,000 people dead and transformed the city into one of the most dangerous places on earth. Before joining the Sinaloa cartel, Torres Marufo was allegedly an independent marijuana trafficker, paying a hefty tax to the local government officials for permission to transport drugs through the Juarez border. When the war broke out, Torres Marufo formed the Gente Nueva to support the Sinaloa cartel, and under the guidance of El Chapo, he became the cartel's regional boss in Juarez. Torres Marufo ordered and oversaw numerous assassination squads dedicated to fighting the Juarez cartel. And by 2008, he was running all of the Sinaloa cartel's drug shipments in the Chihuahua region. He used a Jaguar logo on cocaine packages, and even to mark the bodies of his victims, a calling card, meaning he feared no one and was willing to flaunt his crimes. And his cruelty knew no bounds. He kidnapped and murdered those who stood in his way, leaving their mutilated bodies as a warning to others. One of his victims was a reputed drug dealer, Sergio Saucedo. Saucedo was blamed for the loss of a massive drug shipment seized at the U.S. border, leading El Jaguar to order his daytime kidnapping from his home in El Paso. A few days later, Saucedo was found brutally tortured and killed in Juarez. But El Jaguar's bloodlust didn't stop there. During a wedding ceremony in Juarez, he ordered the kidnapping of a U.S. citizen groom, his brother, and their uncle. The 3 men were found dead a few days later. Perhaps the most horrifying of El Jaguar's crimes was his masterminding of a massacre at a drug rehabilitation center. 18 people were lined up and brutally shot to death in one of the most shocking and brutal acts of violence in the city's history. But despite all that, he was merely a ruthless puppet master, pulling the strings from behind the scene. With his power unchallenged, he was content to bark out orders, while his right-hand man did the dirty work. But as fate would have it, the one who carried out his bidding would soon meet a similar end. The Grim Reaper. September 2nd, 2009. In the border town of Juarez, violence and bloodshed were an everyday occurrence. but the events that unfolded in the early hours of that morning were beyond horrific. The El Aliviane Rehabilitation Center, meant to provide hope and a new start to those struggling with addiction, became the latest site of a bloody massacre. Gunmen believed to be associated with drug traffickers barged into the center and began their ruthless shooting spree, lining up their victims against the wall and pulling the trigger without mercy. The sound of gunfire echoed through the neighborhood as helpless victims fell one by one. The aftermath of the attack was a grisly sight, as 18 people lay lifeless, their blood staining the streets. Most of the victims were seeking treatment for drug or alcohol addiction, but it was reported that many were members of the notorious Barrio Azteca gang and the Juarez cartel. This was not the first attack on a drug rehabilitation center, as drug traffickers target their rivals and those seeking refuge in these centers, but the sheer brutality of this attack left the entire community in shock and horror. September 3rd, 2009, one day after the rehab incident, the morning peace in El Paso, Texas, was shattered by the sound of gunshots, followed by the screams of one man. Sergio Saucedo, a notorious criminal, had been kidnapped from his Horizon City home. His wife was powerless to stop the three men who had broken into their house, duct-taped their husband, and stuffed him into the trunk of an SUV. Witnesses reported hearing the commotion and the helpless cries. Days later, the body of Saucedo was discovered in Juarez, but it wasn't just his life that had been taken. His arms were severed and crossed on his chest as a symbol for thievery. The local authorities quickly identified him as the missing Texan man, whose past was stained with drug possession and money laundering. May 7th, 2010. The day of his wedding should have been the happiest day of his life, but instead it turned into a living nightmare for Rafael Morales Valencia. As he exited the El Señor de la Misericordia Catholic Church in Juarez with his brother and best man Jaime Morales Valencia and their uncle Guadalupe Morales Areola, they were suddenly snatched by armed men. The groom and his family members were taken to separate safe houses, which would soon become their prisons, as the three men were subjected to unimaginable torture and brutality. And why? For nothing more than being suspected of belonging to the Juarez cartel. Days later, the tortured bodies of the three men were found in the bed of an abandoned pickup truck. All those gruesome acts were perpetrated by the hands of one man, Mario Iglesias Villegas, the Grim Reaper. He was the leader of a group of ruthless sicarios working for the Sinaloa cartel and the trusted right-hand man of El Hayad. The Grim Reaper is believed to have been involved in the deaths of thousands of people between 2008 and 2011. For years, he and his boss, El Hayad, were among the most wanted fugitives in the El Paso division of the DEA. Finally, in 2014, they were caught and extradited to the U.S. to face justice. And now the Grim Reaper and El Hayad sit behind bars of a maximum security prison, serving a life sentence with no chance of ever seeing the outside world again.